Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Wednesday, December 31st. Happy New Year's Eve. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, NIH aims to enroll 1 million Americans in a health study. But first, it must close critical gaps in protecting their data. Plus, bid protests crafted by AI are increasing. But when they cite cases that don't exist, the fallout is real. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The FAA has been working to update its aging air traffic control system literally for decades now. But 2026 is looking to be a big year on the FAA modernization front. The One Big Beautiful Bill Congress passed earlier this year puts more than $12 billion towards air traffic control modernization. And the FAA's new administrator expects to obligate about half of that by the end of this fiscal year. Federal News Network's Jared Serbu has an update on the agency's modernization plans and how they've changed under the new administration.
The FAA is on an aggressive schedule to completely replace the air traffic control system within the next 3 years. But the billions of dollars in reconciliation funding targeted for expenditure in fiscal 2026 is meant to lay the foundation for that long-term plan. The agency says it's using the funds to modernize its telecommunications and air surveillance systems, including by replacing aging copper circuits with fiber optics. Brian Bedford is the FAA's administrator.
When we talk about modernizing telco, most people think about moving from copper to fiber, going, from analog to digital. And that's all true, but there's another element of modernization that we aren't doing today. The second round of funding that we're asking for will be critical to get that done, and that is essentially to re-architect how the fiber is laid. So, for example, Dallas-Fort Worth, we had a significant outage, our TRACON there. That system theoretically was modernized, but the architecture of that system had not been modernized. So there's really a two-step process here. So even in places where we're replacing copper with fiber, I just want to be transparent that there's still another step that has to happen to get from analog to digital, which will drive the resilience and our capabilities to increase bandwidth in our facilities. So it's an important distinction.
Bedford testifying this month before the Senate Commerce Committee. He told lawmakers the telco modernization work is now about 35% complete, and that portion of the overall project should be finished by the third quarter of fiscal 2027. But to complete all the work the agency thinks will need to happen in order to fully modernize the system, officials say they'll need another $20 billion on top of the $12.5 billion they refer to as a down payment. And to manage the overall project, earlier this month, the FAA hired Pentagon to serve as the prime integrator for the new system. In order to meet that 3-year target, Bedford says the agency built in specific incentives to reward performance and on-time delivery across 14 areas the FAA has identified as critical needs.
We set up a series of needs packages that clearly articulate what the work streams are and the estimated timeline to completion. Peraton's profit, if we want to think about that, is essentially broken into 3 different elements. There's a fixed profit element of 3%, and then there's a variable profitable element of 6%. The 6% variable profitability element is contingent upon completing the plan on budget and on time with our satisfaction. And we will hold back 3% of the potential profits for any potential damages that might happen for failure to comply with our work packages. So it's a very strenuous agreement, and we have vigilant oversight on it.
Meanwhile, the agency says it will also need additional funding to keep the current system up and running while the new one is being built. The Government Accountability Office has identified 105 individual components of the overall system that it's deemed unsustainable, as those subsystems, many of them decades old, continue to age. So, as Bedford says, the $5 billion in annual modernization funding Congress is considering as part of the standard appropriations process is more about operating and sustaining those legacy systems than modernizing them.
I believe as you read many of these audit reports, you would learn the same thing that I have, which is 80% of our infrastructure is considered obsolete and or unsustainable. Of course, the vast majority of that $5 billion doesn't actually go to build new brick and mortar. 85 to 90% of those funds actually go to sustaining, repairing, painting, replacing elevators and HVAC systems and plumbing and roofs. I mean, frankly, we're putting lipstick on a pig. So you may think you're buying brand new infrastructure with the $5 billion, but what you're buying is sustainment of the old system.
The overall modernization project is broken down into 5 categories: communications, surveillance, automation, facilities, and broad updates across the state of Alaska. Senator Tammy Duckworth, the ranking Democrat on the Transportation Subcommittee on Aviation, Space, and Innovation, says there needs to be one more: workforce.
We must remember that the recent aviation safety crisis was driven by decades of FAA pouring billions into unproven technologies and costly service contracts as it pursued in vain modernization projects with overly ambitious goals and constantly changing requirements. These shiny objects lured FAA into neglecting the health, capabilities, and capacity of our AT system's most important assets, its people. Under presidents of both parties and across multiple Congresses, ATC shed critical expertise and experience, and between 2013 and 2023, FAA only hired 2/3 of the controllers that FAA's own staffing model called for. So today, we find ourselves short 3,500 air traffic controllers, while air travel rises to record highs and controllers are forced to regularly work 60-hour weeks because well over 90% of airports are understaffed. Placing the lives of our constituents in the hands of civil servants who are overworked and utterly exhausted was and remains unfair, unacceptable, and ultimately dangerous.
Bedford says the agency is taking workforce issues seriously under a separate initiative called Flight Plan 2026. He says the FAA has plans to hire 8,900 new controllers between now and 2028. But the recent government shutdown didn't help matters. An estimated 500 people withdrew from the FAA's controller training program while they were waiting for the shutdown to end. And for controllers already on the job, staffing shortages caused an unprecedented number of safety-related air traffic slowdowns.
Staffing triggers reached unprecedented levels, rising from mere single digits prior to the lapse to more than 80 in a single day. Applying the hard lessons we've learned from the DCA accident, the FAA safety team identified controller workload and system demand as emerging risk factors. And as a response to this increased risk, we temporarily reduced operations at 40 high-traffic airports. The connection between controller workload, system demand, and operational risk was unmistakable, and it reinforced the need for the FAA to act decisively when the data demanded it, and underscored the importance of stable controller funding.
Jared Serbu, Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.
You can find Jared's story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, bid protests crafted by AI are increasing, but when they cite cases that don't exist, the fallout is real. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. As contractors lean on AI to draft bid protests, some filings have cited cases that don't exist or don't support their claims. We'll explore why this is happening, the legal risks, and what AI means for speed and accuracy in acquisition with Stephen Bacon, partner in the Government Contracts Practice Group at Rogers Joseph O'Donnell. Mr. Bacon, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
We have a pretty interesting topic here. We're hearing a lot about contractors increasingly turning to AI for help with bid protests. What are you hearing, and what do you think is driving this trend?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot more protests, particularly at the Government Accountability Office in the last several months that have been filed using AI, a party that's not represented by counsel, using AI to generate the protest and then file it. But we're seeing some problems with that in some of the decisions that are coming out of the GAO.
So tell me more about how companies are using AI. You mentioned that they're doing this without the help of legal counsel as well.
That's right, at least the ones that we've seen so far in public decisions at GAO. It's not entirely clear how the protesters are using it, but we can imagine that maybe they're taking the debriefing information that they're getting from the agency, they're uploading that into an LLM like ChatGPT or Claude, and using it to develop a protest argument that they can file with the GAO. And what we're seeing in the decisions is that many of the protests that have been filed using AI contain hallucinations, right? Case citations that don't exist to actual cases that have been decided by GAO. So the legal precedent that the protesters are relying on, in fact, don't exist. And that's one of the inherent limitations of LLMs, is that they hallucinate. They come up with decisions, citations that don't exist. And to be clear, we're not just seeing this by protesters that are not represented by counsel. This is happening in courts all across the country, where attorneys are using AI to help generate legal filings and then getting in trouble with the courts when those citations don't actually exist. Because when you file a protest or any kind of legal filing that has a citation in it, the court is relying on you to make an accurate representation that the legal authority that you're relying on is in fact correct and is in fact a decision that has been issued in the past. And so both courts and the GAO now are saying that you can get in trouble, you can be sanctioned as a protester if you submit a protest that has some kind of fake citation that's inaccurate.
What does that mean to be sanctioned as GAO reviews the case?
Yeah, well, at GAO, they have inherent authority to sanction protesters. And really the main sanction that they have is to dismiss a protest. So if you happen to file a protest that contains fake citations, they reserve the right to dismiss your protest. So even if you have legally valid grounds to protest, maybe you have identified an error in the agency's selection process, if GAO determines that you relied on fake citations in your protest, they could dismiss the protest, even if the actual merits of it may have some validity to it.
So there's some interesting intersections of situation going on here, I think. There's a lot of uncertainty on the contractor side about the new FAR regulations and how those are going to be enforced, certainly across different agencies. We've had a reduction in the contractor workforce, so there are fewer contractors managing more acquisitions. And now we have AI coming in to sort of simplify, but potentially also make much more complex the whole protest market. So do you expect all of this to be leading to an increase in protests? And what does that mean for GAO as they're trying to sort out the validity of all the claims?
Yeah, I think it certainly has the potential to. I mean, if what we're seeing in the decisions is a trend towards more at least pro se protesters, pro se being parties that are not represented by counsel, using AI. And to the extent that that trend continues, I think that there'll be a lower barrier for protesters to file at GAO if they think that they can use an LLM to generate a protest without having to spend, legal fees on outside counsel, which, is understandable that, particularly for small businesses who may have resource constraints, if they feel like they can use an LLM to help them challenge an award decision, we may see more of that at GAO. And I think what GAO is saying in these opinions that have come out, where they're trying to, they're warning protesters that, using LLMs that create fake citations is sanctionable. They didn't actually take the step of issuing a sanction, but finally in the last several months, we saw that they did in fact take that step of dismissing a protest, actually several protests that were filed by the same company that contained fake citations. They actually took that step and dismissed those protests on the grounds that they misrepresented legal authority in their filings with the GAO.
I'm speaking with Stephen Bacon. He's a partner in the Government Contracts Practice Group at Rogers Joseph O'Donnell. You mentioned small businesses and their capacity constraints in terms of they may not have in-house counsel. They may not have a lot of folks who can review all of this. But does this have the effect of sort of adding some equality into the protest market where they can use AI to submit? And do you think then that that's going to change the protest space? Are we going to see, is this just the tip of the iceberg in terms of transformation?
I think it could be. I mean, it certainly lowers the barrier for companies to, I mean, the GAO was set up to be a relatively informal forum to allow for the resolution, a quick and efficient resolution of protests. And so I don't think what GAO is saying necessarily is that AI cannot be used, but what they are saying is that we have a process to resolve bid protests, and we want to maintain the integrity of that. And if you're going to use AI, you need to be sure that you verify that what you're filing is accurate. And so, for anybody that is thinking about using AI to generate a protest, there needs to be some level of quality checking of what is in the draft that's generated by an LLM to be sure that you're making accurate representations to the GAO in your protest. So that means checking the legal citations to make sure that the cases actually exist, right? And so that basic level of quality checking needs to happen. Otherwise, GAO could just be flooded with protests that have no merit and that have lots of inaccuracies in them. And that's not going to help them resolve protests in a way that's efficient and achieves their ultimate goal.
So where do you think we go from here? And what's your guidance to the companies who are considering using AI to file their protests?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think for any company that's contemplating using an AI to generate protests, I mean, the basic point, if you're going to do it, you have to verify that the citations are accurate. So you have to verify that what an LLM is generating is citing to a decision that has been published by GAO in the past, and that's relatively easy to do. GAO has all of their decisions on their website, and you can go and check those and verify that not only that the citations are accurate, but the legal proposition that you're asserting is supported by the case that's being cited. That's important to you. And so that's kind of table stakes. But the other thing I would say is that what we're seeing in a lot of these decisions where it's obvious from the decision that AI has been used and that GAO is pointing out that there are these fake citations is that oftentimes those protests are being dismissed for procedural defects as well. So things like timeliness and bid protest standing, those kind of procedural issues are being missed by the protesters who are using LLMs to generate their filings. And that's because of another inherent limitation of an LLM is that it often will tell you what you want it to say in a lot of ways. So if you tell the LLM, generate me a protest on this issue or that issue, it will do that. And it might produce something that looks on its face credible and compelling. But if you don't have the domain knowledge of the timeliness rules and the standing rules, you're often going to overlook those things. And the LLM's not going to catch it for you. And so you may be in a situation where you file something that looks on its face credible, but is in fact an untimely protest.
I've been speaking with Stephen Bacon. He's a partner in the Government Contracts Practice Group at Rogers Joseph O'Donnell. Mr. Bacon, thanks for reminding us to keep that human in the loop here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, the Pentagon says it's short more than 20,000 cyber professionals, and one group says veterans could help fill the gap. But first, NIH aims to enroll 1 million Americans in a health study. But first, it must close critical gaps in protecting their data. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The All of Us research program aims to build one of the largest health databases in history. But an OIG audit found weaknesses in NIH's oversight and access controls that could put sensitive participant data at risk. Charles Summers from the HHS Office of Inspector General is here to share what needs to change to protect privacy as enrollment grows. Mr. Summers, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you for having me here today to discuss some of the important work we're doing here at Health and Human Services.
You are doing important work, and I want to talk about this program specifically, the All of Us research program at NIH. Tell us what that's all about.
So NIH has a goal of, enrolling up 1 million plus Americans into a research program that is based around genetics and precision medicine. So it's really, I guess, the future of medicine. It's really, I think where things are headed. So instead of treating you based on age or race or any of those things, they would treat you based on genetics. So this medicine is specifically for you and would, help you better than just a guess that we get on some of it. So that's the overall goal of what NIH wants to do with this research data and research.
1 million
outputs.
people, that's a lot of folks. And genetic information is pretty personal. What is going on in terms of being able to protect participant data?
So for us at the OIGs, definitely that's one of our highest and most important things is protecting the data and securing the data, and just lending a hand as far as oversight in pointing where there is places to make improvements or recommendations to improve and secure data to requirements that are out there, as well as if we see something that just doesn't seem right. So that's our main goal, is protect that data, because it's not just their data, it's our data, and it's our parents' data, and it's American data.
What prompted you then to look at the data protection processes in this research program? Was there a red flag or something that happened?
So we've done work at NIH since I've been working here, and we kind of go through risk and things like that. So the All of Us program, which with genomic data is Office of National Council, has said that this is a national security concerns with genomic data. So that's kind of, we've done other OPDIVs as well, but NIH with this program, we've done some work here in the past with the All of Us program. So we checked up on some of those findings from the past, as well as there's persistent cybersecurity and national security threats, have increased, and challenges across the board as far as technology is, and those vectors that NIH must lock down across to protect this data. So all of those combined, it's critical operations and programs that we feel are of everybody's concern, as well as partnering with HHS as far as how we're going to protect the program as a whole.
It seems like if you're going to get 1 million people to volunteer, one of the core guarantees is that their data be protected. What did you find as you got into the audit?
Absolutely. And I do want to emphasize what you said. It is core to the program, because if you lose that trust, then less people are going to join. Currently, NIH says they have over 600,000 participants already in the program enrolled. I mean, the goal is 1 million, but that's where they're currently over 600,000 already enrolled. And some of the key cybersecurity gaps that we found there was inadequate access controls, allowed access from the systems from abroad, which was employees. It's not just normal somebody trying to get access, but the employees could access that data from abroad. We also found that the system permitted the research participants to download data, even though policies and procedures restricted that and did not allow for that. In kind of both of those access controls, we like to say it's kind of like there was a warning banners that pop up to say, hey, you can't do this, but it's kind of like a door with a scary sign on it that says, hey, don't go in here. But the door's it's unlocked and you can go through it. So you could close those and go ahead and access this data and download some of this data. And that's not what we normally would see. We would want to see block it. And if there was a need for it, then you would go through the proper procedures to get it to, open those for you. And then the last two things that we found was NIH had failed to inform the Data Research Center, which was the awardee of this, that houses the data for them. They didn't, inform them of the national security concerns around genomic data. So when that Data Research Center awardee is setting up the system and kind of going through checks and balances on security controls, they set it to a certain level based on risk, in which they do the risk assessments. But NIH didn't give them that key piece of information, which could have changed where the level that maybe that security should be at, should be maybe up another notch. So that wasn't factored in when they were doing risk assessments. And lastly, we found that the Data Research Center was not remediating findings that they find themselves, as well as something that may come up from an audit or something like that, in the time requirements that align with the federal requirements. And it was in the contract, so they had some different time frames, and those was agreement. It was in the system security plan, and so those were were in opposition of what they had already agreed to as far as the contract.
You mentioned as you walked through those findings that the genomic database is managed by a contractor, DRC. Is that a normal thing for these kinds of research projects? And what does that say to you about the need for better oversight between HHS, NIH, and the contractor?
So yes, your point is very valid. And yes, the NIH does have the responsibility for oversight for all their contractors. And that is very typical for this type of program in all of these large OpDivs, and throughout HHS, we leverage contractors and grantees and things like that, just as the need for so much expertise in these areas. A lot of times that is where you have to go to get that much expertise, because you're needing large numbers of people. So it is very much NIH's responsibility to have that in the contracts, as well as the oversight to ensure that the proper security levels are being maintained. And I think that's noted in some of the findings there. Is, for instance, the finding of not providing them the information that genomic data is of national security concerns. So that would factor into the risk assessment, which is part of the agreement for the DRC to complete. And so without that complete information, things maybe not at the correct level. So that's definitely the burden is on NIH for that oversight and ensuring that is taking place.
So you made 5 recommendations in this report. Are any of them, do you think, particularly urgent? And what are you hoping to see NIH do quickly to respond?
Okay. Yeah, and typically you're correct, and it's very important, I think, is we don't normally rank those findings, but our access controls kind of tend to drift to the top, because that is the gate to getting access in the system and restricting access to people you don't want in the system. For instance, the first recommendation was to enforce the restrictions for remote users. Very important to us, as we have, there's certain countries of concern, which is constantly in the news. And so we want to ensure if people are there, we're using proper security and you have, proper approvals. And so that was one of our findings as well. And also blocking unauthorized downloads of data. So both of those around access control, very high, as well as remediating findings timely, because those are weaknesses that are there, and your time frames to remediate those, you want them to be as short as possible to close those windows of known vulnerabilities that adversaries may use to try to gain access to the system. And NIH did reply to us and respond very acceptable, and is also agreed to, I should say, concurred with all those findings as we describe it. And they have already taken some actions on all these findings. And part of our tracking system is kind of where they're at, and we have time frames, and they kind of report, here's where we're at, here's what we're going to do next. And so that goes back and forth until the completion. So we ensure that those are completed.
I've been speaking with Charles Summers. He's the Assistant Director for Cybersecurity and Information Technology Audit Division in the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the Inspector General. Mr. Summers, thanks for sharing this important report with us today.
Thank you so much, Terry.
We'll post this interview and a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, the Pentagon says it's short more than 20,000 cyber professionals, and one group says veterans could help fill that gap. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The Pentagon faces a shortage of more than 20,000 cyber professionals, and across the country, the civilian cyber shortfall is estimated at over 750,000. This raises big questions about how to build a stronger pipeline. Veterans bring mission focus and technical aptitude, but challenges remain in training, credentialing, and connecting talent to opportunity. Ryan Dunford of BitWizards is here to explore what works and what's next for bridging the gap between military service and cyber careers. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
Recent DoD news revealed that the military says it's short 20,000 cyber professionals, and we've heard a number probably bigger than that by an order of magnitude for the commercial sector. What are the biggest obstacles that you think are hindering building this cyber workforce?
I think some of the biggest obstacles to building that workforce come from the idea that the cyber industry is extremely complicated, or that it requires some sort of superior intellect for somebody to get into, that it's not accessible. I think another part is that the education feels out of reach for some. They don't have the ability to get the certifications or the schooling required in order to break into the industry.
So you're making the point that the veteran population would be a great target for building the cyber workforce if we could recruit more veterans into these kinds of positions. Tell me more about the connections that you draw between military experience and cyber work.
Well, from my own experience, when I was recruited into the Marine Corps, I took the ASVAB. They gave me a choice of jobs, and to be honest, at 19 years old, I just picked the one that sounded the coolest, and I had no IT background or anything like that. But what it allowed me to do was get myself the IT training, the experience, the on-the-job training, everything that would then serve me later on in my career when I got out into the private sector.
And for veterans who may be leaving the military without military IT experience, how did they even begin to think about connecting to a cyber opportunity?
For somebody who's been in the military but not in military IT, the transition is not as hard as you would think. There is schooling out there. There is education out there for you. And the skills that you learned as an active duty military member can serve you across the industry of the cyber industry in so many different ways. The inherent leadership training that we get as active duty military members, the attention to detail that is stressed so much, operational excellence, all the great things that make you good at being a soldier, sailor, Marine, will make you good at your job in the private sector as well. The only thing you need to bridge the gap is to just reach out and get the training.
We talk a lot in terms of veteran employment and transition about those soft skills, those leadership skills, that flexibility and initiative. But cyber really does have some technical skill requirements. Where should folks be thinking about looking for the right kind of training? Are they just credentials? Are they degree programs? Is it all of the above? If someone's interested in this, where should they start?
Without formal experience, there's a few different places you can start. There are industry certifications from some of the big names like CompTIA, Microsoft, Cisco, Amazon, AWS. Those certifications are going to serve you extremely well. They are highly visible to employers on a resume and can help establish that you have put in the work and have the technical knowledge required to make it in the industry.
I'm speaking with Ryan Dunford. He's a former Marine and lead infrastructure engineer at BitWizards. Let's change the focus a little bit. We've been talking about veterans so far, but for folks who are still on active duty and maybe separating soon, what programs should they be looking at? Are you engaged with the SkillBridge program or other sorts of GI Bill funded certifications that folks might engage with to help prepare them for cyber opportunities?
First and foremost, listen to the transition assistance folks. You know, that was a big part of transitioning out of the military. And it's easy at the end there to kind of blow it off and just get super impatient to get out. But the transition assistance program for the military is excellent and helps a lot. I would say to those people, start looking around for colleges. That there are a couple colleges out there that offer IT industry certifications to go along with your degree. And that just makes you even stronger in the workforce. There are programs out there that will allow you to leverage your GI Bill in order to break into the cyber field, whether it be in IT administration or cybersecurity or anything like that. All of those opportunities you have in front of you. Take your time, find the one that you want, and pursue it with the same determination you do any other mission.
You started by saying people are sometimes intimidated by the complexity or the technology in a cyber job. Why don't you take just a minute and tell us what you think it means to work in cyber? What would people be doing day to day when they come into the office?
It's a very diverse field. There's a lot of choices out there as far as what you want your career to be and the path that you could take. I personally, as a lead infrastructure engineer, work a client-facing job where every day I'm taking calls from different clients with different types of IT problems. The biggest benefit to that is that I get a diverse challenge every day. but I have to maintain those customer service skills. I have to maintain a sense of duty to the client. A lot of those things that I learned in the military. And then among the small team that I work with, having the adaptability and the leadership skills that I learned in the military has also benefited me. If you want to specialize, you absolutely can. There's places you can go where you could, if you wanted to be a cybersecurity professional and just work in that security sector, you absolutely can do that. If you want to just work in the background and work in programming or software development or something like that, that's all available to you. Just because you feel like the part of IT that you've seen might be a little bit intimidating or that you don't quite understand it, I still encourage every veteran to look into IT as a possible career, because there could be something out there for you. There's a little something for everybody. Some of it more on the customer service and soft skill side, some of it more on the highly technical side, but it's all there for you.
So should someone just go to Indeed, for example, and search cyber jobs and start reading about what they require? Is that a good way to get a feel for it?
Well, a lot of the skills that, like I mentioned before, are already there. A lot of active duty military members have a lot of the skills necessary to make it in the IT world. But that's definitely something that can help. Go out to the job boards, start looking at the job postings that are out there. One of the challenges that veterans run into when they transfer into the private sector is the language barrier. The military has its own language. The acronyms and the different terminology that gets used for different things doesn't always translate directly into the private sector. So it can be extremely valuable to read those job postings, find out what the terminology is being used in the private sector, what one thing means, and how to associate that with the corresponding military term. Those sort of things will serve you really well when you're out there looking for those jobs.
I've been speaking with Ryan Dunford, a former Marine and lead infrastructure engineer at BitWizards. Ryan, thank you for your service, and thanks for bringing us this information.
Thanks for having me, Terry. I really appreciate it.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Up next, the top national headlines from CBS News and the Federal Newscast. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.
And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Wednesday, December 31st. Happy New Year's Eve. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, NIH aims to enroll 1 million Americans in a health study, but first it must close critical gaps in protecting their data. Plus, bid protests crafted by AI are increasing, but when they cite cases that don't exist, the fallout is real. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Department of Homeland Security's year was marked by high-profile immigration enforcement operations and turbulence behind the scenes. DHS also received a historic influx of new funding under the Tax and Reconciliation Bill passed by Congress in July. But the department faces some big management challenges as it prepares for a consequential year ahead. Justin Doubleday joins me now for more on DHS's year in review. Justin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
All right. In 500 words or less, what were some of the biggest changes at DHS this year?
500 words. We'll see. Well, the change in administration was obviously the huge change for DHS. Border security and deportation operations have obviously been perhaps top priority of this administration. And Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has been the face of those operations in many ways. And you've seen that trickle down to the management of the department. You look at staffing levels, DHS was one of the few federal agencies that actually increased its staff this year. Most Other departments went the other way. But those increases are largely concentrated at places like Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the Coast Guard. Other components, like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, have seen relatively big staffing departures, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. But suffice to say, there's been a huge change in priority at DHS over the last year.
Secretary Noem, as you say, has certainly been the face of the department. How has she run it? Is she doing things differently than her predecessors?
She certainly is. And I think one of the big things to look at that kind of exemplifies this change is the fact that she is really kind of controlling all of the big spending that happens at what is a very large department that spends a lot of money. In June, Noem signed out a new policy that she must review and sign off on all contracts and awards over $100,000. Our colleague Jason Miller broke that story, actually, and he crunched the numbers at the time. In 2024, DHS had 11,597 awards over $100,000, just a significant amount of awards that that would fall under that policy. We've heard from contractors that they've seen, expected awards delayed significantly. We've heard from federal employees that they've seen delays in their programs and, contractor support falling off for their programs. There's been a prioritization, clearly, in certain areas, in the wake of the Texas flooding over the summer. FEMA spending got out the door really quickly. DHS recently released a request for proposals for a counter-UAS contract that could be worth up to $1.5 billion. So there's definitely some priorities there. But one source familiar with how this process is working told me that, the backlog of DHS contracts has built up at certain points to roughly 5,000 awards that are waiting for Noem's approval. DHS's position on this is that Noem is, saving taxpayer money and making sure the department is appropriately spending that money. She actually appeared at a recent industry conference and said she has personally reviewed more than 9,000 contracts. She said that the DHS has, her review process has saved the department more than $13 billion. These are very difficult numbers to independently verify. That is a remarkable amount of contracts for a cabinet member at her level to review. She has an incredibly busy schedule and is often traveling. What is clear is that Noem and her team are committed to this process for the time being, and that's something that industry has had to adjust to.
The department is so big. It's a composite of a dozen or more separate agencies. Which of those components saw the biggest changes this year?
Well, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is one. CISA was kind of an early target of this administration and Secretary Noem. They have criticized the agency in the past for what they call censorship, and they're referring to CISA's disinformation activities surrounding the 2020 elections, surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic, some other issues. CISA had all but ceased those activities by last year because they had received some criticism, and the staff who worked on those issues amounted to less than 36 employees. And CISA has shed far more staff this year. More than 1,000 employees have left the agency through voluntary programs and some terminations. That's roughly 1/3 of the staff that CISA had at the start of the year. Like many DHS components, CISA has also had a lot of uncertainty around its leadership. Many senior CISA executives were among those who departed the agency in late spring. And Sean Planke has been nominated to serve as CISA director. He's a widely respected cybersecurity leader, but his nomination is being held up in the Senate over various issues. One CISA employee who asked to remain anonymous, who remains at the agency, told me it's just been an extremely difficult year.
One of the other agencies at DHS that's gotten a lot of attention is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. What's the year been like at FEMA?
Well, similar to CISA, FEMA was kind of on the early target list of this administration. President Trump actually said within his first few days in office that they would get rid of FEMA and go to something else. And while administration officials have mostly backed off that type of rhetoric, they still appear to be angling to downsize the agency and shift more responsibility to state and local governments. FEMA has also shed a lot of staff. There was a Government Accountability Office report that came out earlier this fall The number of active FEMA employees decreased from 25,800 to about 23,350, so about 2,500 employees over the course of the spring. That includes a lot of career staff who work up at FEMA headquarters. It includes 24 senior executives who departed the agency. So again, a lot of seasoned people, a lot of seasoned staff left FEMA this year. And the agency has had 3 separate acting leaders, none of whom have the extensive emergency management experience that a FEMA administrator typically has. Trump has not nominated anyone to serve as a permanent FEMA administrator, and we're still awaiting the recommendations of the FEMA Review Council. Those recommendations are expected to serve as a blueprint for this administration's plan for FEMA, but the council's recommendations were set to be voted on last week. The White House unexpectedly and at the last minute delayed that vote to whenever we will see next.
With all these changes at DHS in 2025, Justin, what are you watching for coming into 2026?
Definitely the confirmation and selection of senior leaders at the department. One thing to mention here recently is that Deputy Secretary Troy Edgar is now on his way out after less than a year on the job. He's been nominated to be the ambassador to El Salvador. He has extensive management experience at DHS from the first Trump administration, and before that, his departure leaves a major hole at DHS when it is, spending all this money through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, when it lacks already a lot of senior confirmed leaders. So who will replace Troy Edgar? Who will fill other jobs at DHS headquarters and throughout many of the components? It just remains to be seen. Another big thing, the issuance of the FEMA Review Council's report. That was expected, as I mentioned earlier this month, and now we're not quite sure when that might happen, but that is going to lay out conceivably the administration's long-term vision for FEMA, and that's been an open question here. So that's a big one. And as we just talked about, the implementation of OB3, as it's being called, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, how DHS, effectively hires thousands of new officers, how it spends funding on everything from border security technologies to Coast Guard ships. It's a huge bill. It's a huge task without a lot of senior leadership confirmed in place. How is Secretary Noem and the current department leadership going to handle that?
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks so much for this deep dive.
Thank you, Terry.
You can find Justin's story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, bid protests crafted by AI are increasing, but when they cite cases that don't exist, the fallout is real. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.